What if the person you love isn't just stressed or just busy or just angry? What if what you're seeing, the short fuse, the overworking, the risk taking, the I'm fine when they clearly are not fine, is actually depression showing up in a way most of us were never taught to recognize? New research is challenging the picture many of us have of depression because sometimes depression doesn't look like crying or staying in bed. Sometimes it looks like someone who keeps going, who keeps performing, who keeps everyone at arm's length and is carrying a much heavier psychological load than anyone realizes.
Welcome to Nerdy Psychology. Break it down with a little curiosity. So be curious, stay kind, keep your mind nerdy.
Hi, psychology nerds. Welcome or welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Angel, a licensed mental health practitioner, and this is Nerdy Psychology, where we break down human behavior in a nerdy, science-based way with practical tools that you could actually use. Around here, we don't just read headlines, we learn how to think about them. Today, we're digging into a brand new study out of Germany on something researchers call masculine depression. It's a pattern of depression that can show up as anger, aggression, overwork, self-isolation, and avoidance rather than the obvious sadness. We'll look at what the researchers actually found, what the study can and can't tell us, and what this means for recognizing depression in yourself or someone you love. And stick around to the end because the biggest takeaway isn't what most people expect. It's about who gets missed when our picture of depression is too narrow. This study was just published in Scientific Reports, and it comes out of a psychiatry research team in Germany. The question behind it is really simple, but really important. What happens when depression doesn't show up the way we expect it to? Most of us are trained to look for sadness, crying, low motivation, withdrawal, but this study focused on a different pattern. Depression that shows up more on the things on the outside through anger and irritability and risk taking and shutting down emotions or acting like everything's fine when life is not fine. Researchers call this pattern masculine depression. But I want to be very clear right away. This does not mean it only happens to men. The name comes from the fact that this pattern was first studied in men who did not fit the classic depression picture. But the bigger idea is not men versus women. The bigger idea is this: some people carry emotional pain by turning it outward, not inward. And when that happens, loved ones, doctors, or even the person themselves may not recognize it as depression. Here's what the researchers did. They compared 163 people who were hospitalized for depression with 176 healthy adults. The patient group included both women and men. About 44% were women and about 56% were men, which matters because the question wasn't just, does this happen in men? It was, does this outward facing pattern show up across sex? And does it come with a heavier overall mental health burden? Everyone completed questionnaires. One measured the externalizing pattern we've been talking about. The other measured broader psychological distress, things like anxiety and body symptoms, hostility, suspicious thoughts, and how intense someone's symptoms felt overall. Then the researchers split the depressed patients into two groups: lower scores on this pattern and higher scores. And this is the part that matters. The people with the higher scores were not doing better because they looked more active or more forceful or more in control. They actually had a greater overall mental health burden, even after the researchers accounted for how severe their depression was to begin with. Okay, so in plain English, this was not just a different personality style or a different way of coping. It was linked with people struggling more across several areas of their mental health. The biggest differences showed up in body-based distress, anger, hostility, suspicious or mistrustful thinking, and the more severe psychological symptoms overall. So when someone says, "I'm not sad, I'm just irritated," or "I'm fine, I just can't relax," this study gives us a reason to pause and ask a deeper question. Could this distress be coming out as depression sideways? Another key takeaway, this pattern showed up in both men and women. So even though the label includes the word masculine, the research does not support treating this as a men-only issue. It's better understood as a way of distress can be expressed through irritability, control, avoidance, intensity, or behavior, rather than this separate kind of depression that belongs only to one sex. So let's make the language really clear. Sometimes distress turns inward and sometimes it turns outward. And that's the difference between internalizing and externalizing symptoms. Internalizing symptoms are those ones that we think of. This is the version of depression most of us recognize. Things like sadness and hopelessness, low energy, fatigue, withdrawal, loss of interest, crying, isolation, changes in food patterns, changes in sleep patterns. It's easier to spot because it matches the picture we usually see in movies, textbooks, and public health campaigns. Externalizing symptoms turn outward, and this can look like irritability and a short temper and conflict and risk-taking and substance abuse and avoiding vulnerability, shutting down feelings, or carrying distress through the body like headaches and tension and stomach issues. That is the pattern that is called masculine depression. And this is why it matters clinically. Someone with high externalizing symptoms may look like they're managing life just fine, productive, in control, maybe even thriving. But that surface impression can make depression harder to recognize, including the person experiencing it. So, what the research doesn't tell us. Every good study has limitations. Not because it's bad science, but because that's how science works. Understanding those limitations helps us know how confidently we can apply the findings. There's a few things worth flagging here. First, this was a correlational cross-sectional study. Everyone was measured once. So we can't say that this externalizing pattern causes greater distress or that greater distress causes people to develop this pattern. It's an association and not this proven cause and effect chain. Second, everyone in the study was already hospitalized. They were actively seeking treatment. The researchers themselves point out that people with this externalizing profile tend to avoid healthcare altogether. And that means the most severely affected people, the ones who never walk through a clinic door, likely were not captured here at all. If anything, this probably underestimates how much distress this group experienced and against the general population. Third, both of the main measures used were self-report questionnaires, which can inflate how strongly two things appear to be related just because they're measured in the same way. And finally, this comes from one research team's patient cohort in Germany. It builds on several earlier papers from that same group, which is encouraging for consistency, but it still needs replication by independent research teams and in different populations before we can kind of treat this as settled. One thing I want to emphasize before I give this a rating, this is not a report card for the researchers. Every good study adds something valuable to our understanding. The nerdy evidence meter simply helps us think about how confident we can be in applying these findings based on the evidence we have today. This one I am rating good, promising evidence, and here's why. This is a well-designed case control study with solid sample sizes. It was pre-registered in a clinical trials registry, and the statistical models controlled for age, sex, and baseline depression severity, plus applied corrections for multiple comparisons, which is a sign of rigor. It also builds directly on prior work from the same research group. And that's meaningful more than just the single isolated findings. What kept it from being the strong evidence territory is that it's still largely one team, one cohort, one point in time, and it hasn't been, well, replicated yet. Promising and consistent, but still building. Science isn't about finding absolute certainty. It's about becoming more confident as evidence grows. Each study adds another piece of the puzzle. Research tells us what was found. Psychology tells us what it means and how to use it wisely. Clinically, this tracks with something I see regularly. Depression doesn't always announce itself as, well, sadness. Sometimes it shows up in a short fuse or a packed work schedule that never seems to let up, or a few too many drinks after a hard week, or someone who just insists that everything's okay, but their functioning says otherwise. This study gives that clinical pattern some real data behind it. What I want to gently correct here is the instinct to read this as men experience depression differently than women, because that's not actually what the data shows. The externalizing pattern showed up in both sexes, and the researchers were explicit that this reflects a behavioral style, not a male exclusive biology. Anyone, man, women, any background, can develop this coping pattern, particularly under chronic stress or when they've learned that showing vulnerability just isn't safe or acceptable. So, what does this mean for you? If you know someone who seems too busy to be depressed, or who gets irritable instead of tearful, who throws themselves into work or the gym or a project instead of talking about how they're doing, this research suggests that's not necessarily them handling it fine. It might be the same underlying weight expressed through a different door. Let me paint a picture for you. Picture Maria. She's the friend that never cancels plans, always shows up. She's always put together. Somehow she's that go-to person that everybody vents to. Lately, she's been snapping at people over small things. She's been staying up late, reorganizing her closet instead of sleeping, and she's been turning down invitations to hang out, saying that she's busy, but she really isn't. She's at home scrolling through social media, feeling numb. And if you asked her if she felt depressed, she would laugh and say, absolutely not. I'm not crying. I'm not in bed all day. I'm fine. But underneath that irritability and busyness is someone who is exhausted in a way that rest doesn't seem to fix. Now picture Dave. He's the guy at work who takes on every extra project, the first in, the last out, and he jokes that he doesn't do therapy. He's been more short-tempered with his kids lately. He started having a couple of beers on the weeknights, just not on the weekends, and he gets genuinely angry, not sad, angry, when someone suggests he might need to slow down. On paper, he's thriving. Promotions, a full calendar, reputation, have someone who never drops the ball. But that anger, the drinking, the inability to sit still, that's not the absence of depression. And based on what the research describes, it may be exactly what depression looks like on him. Neither Maria nor Dave would show up on any typical depression screening that we use to define it. And that doesn't mean every irritable, hardworking person is secretly depressed. Please do not go diagnose your coworker from a YouTube video. But what it does mean is that our default picture of depression, quiet and tearful and withdrawn, it's incomplete. And it's worth holding a wider lens, especially with people who seem to be functioning too well to be struggling. So what can you do about it? 3 things you could put into practice today. 1, widen your depression checklist. If someone you love has become noticeably more irritable or prone to conflict or is throwing themselves into overwork, don't automatically rule out depression just because they're not sad. Ask them directly, how are you really doing? And then, and this is the most important part, wait for them to answer. 2, normalize help seeking before crisis. This research found that people with this profile tend to avoid mental health care. If you're someone who copes by staying busy or toughing it out, consider that a single check-in with a therapist isn't a sign of weakness. It's data gathering for your own well-being, the same way you'd go get a physical. 3, separate the behavior from the person. If someone in your life is showing anger or frustration or withdrawal that feels, well, out of character, try responding with curiosity instead of judgment. This isn't like you. What's going on? Rather than matching their edge with your own. That single shift in tone can be the difference between someone shutting down further or actually opening up some. This episode is sponsored by my workbook, Your Next Chapter. It's a clinician-developed workbook designed to help you reflect, build practical coping skills, strengthen your boundaries, and navigate life transitions with more clarity. Whether you're the one carrying an invisible weight or you're supporting someone who is, it's built to meet you where you are. The link is in the description below if you're interested. Have you ever noticed someone's depression show up as anger or overworking or withdrawal rather than sadness in yourself or someone you love? I would love to hear about it in the comments if you feel safe. If this episode helped you see depression a little differently, I would love to invite you to hit the like and subscribe if you're not already a part of our nerd herd, and share this with someone who might need a wider lens on what struggling could actually look like. Depression doesn't always look like sadness, and sometimes it looks like anger and exhaustion from overwork or someone who insists that they're fine. Recognizing that wider range of expression is one of the most compassionate things we can do for the people we love. And as always, this research is linked in the description below if you're interested in reading it. If today's conversation resonated with you, I think you'll really enjoy my episode on anxiety because it builds on today's discussion and it helps you better understand how anxiety in men so often gets misdiagnosed or dismissed, the same way this externalizing depression pattern hides in plain sight. And as always, stay curious, be kind, and keep your mind nerdy. See you next Tuesday. That's a wrap.
Be curious, stay kind, keep your mind nerdy.